Can you actually separate a good nutrition foundation from a solid behavior foundation? Can you separate those two concepts of nutrition and behavior? You can, but I think that it's extremely fruitless if you approach it in that way because, and I know we're now getting back to last week, but I think behavior does have to touch all of these things, right? Because there's the decision that needs to be made. There's a rhythm that has to be built. There's a life that needs to be lived. All right, James, today we are talking about, well, last week we talked about fitness truths. We won't rehash those, but that was a good conversation, man. The intention was to roll into nutrition truths as a part of that because we talked about exercise and behavior last week. But I wanted to dedicate a good chunk of time in just talking about nutrition because I think we can go down a couple of different paths, which I think is worthy to do so. So when I asked the question, James, what are some like common in your brain, common nutrition truths or things that you believe to be true? Like outside of getting into those specifics, what comes to your head when I ask that question?
Yeah, I gotta be honest. The first thing that comes to mind is all the time that has been spent on it because I have been a health activist, someone who in the public has, some say, some educated, positive things to contribute to the conversation around that. So this could be a truth. I guess it's the interest that I personally have, but could be a human truth inside of that. There's a practice and a learning and an intuition that's involved in it, in nutrition, that's similar to other, areas that we talked about, like choices and behaviors and movement selection for exercise.
What would you deem to be nutrition lies?
Well, there's so many, but I wrote a couple of notes. I don't know if you saw me smirking last week when you said, "Oh, you got lots of time to think about things for the following week." So counting calories, diets, the quality quantity debate, macros, supplements, and there's lots of lies inside of that, but it's all still under the similar umbrella of the fixing things or the performance things, The line of thinking for our ecosystem, Carl, is that we think it's a really important thing. We think it's tremendously important. And then the public is told, from a really young age throughout that it is a really important thing. And so where are the lies and what are the lies, which causes a lot of chaos and it makes a lot of people a career, honestly. It makes a lot of money for people, power hungry individuals looking for this like ivory tower knowledge that they must bestow, upon people. It's like, listen to me, it's got to be 110 grams of protein per day. And just that in itself, it piques a human interest because it's like, oh, well, why is that human piqued? And the reason is because they've been told you either need to be fixed or you got to perform. And that's connected to nutrition. So all the lies are underneath that. Just like the movement specialist thing I maybe spoke about, or maybe I wrote about it in a blog, but it's sad. People spend their entire career with thinking it's good intentions, but when they go to the office from 9 to 5, quote unquote, the office from 9 to 5 and spend 8 hours, well, an hour for lunch because, you got to have nice. So 7 hours in the day, they're dedicated specifically to that, right? All the things, all the research and everything inside of how do we fix this thing? When instead, a parallel thing, which we'll get into, I believe, is you can just look at principles and what you just asked about, what are truths? And you see, this is where there's some similarities, which I was excited to discuss with regards to the nutrition thing and the exercise thing. But remember, as I said, there's still lots to discuss on the behavior realm that I will spend lots of time thinking about.
When I asked you that question, as you were speaking, I was thinking like, well, what would my response be to that? And I think something interesting to talk about is, can you actually separate a good nutrition foundation from a solid behavior foundation? Can you separate those two concepts of nutrition and behavior? You can, but I think that it's extremely fruitless if you approach it in that way because, and I know we're now getting back to last week, but I think behavior does have to touch all of these things, right? Because there's the decision that needs to be made. There's a rhythm that has to be built. There's a life that needs to be lived, all that stuff. So the first thing I look at, or the first thing I thought about when it was like, okay, what's a lie? It's that your behaviors can be detached from your nutritional practices. And when you detach your behaviors from the nutritional practice, now where does your head go? Your head goes to objectivity, calories, proteins, carbs, fats, fibers, vitamins, mineral, all of that. And you're just looking at it like, I need to hit this thing because I heard that it's optimal for me. I think a really interesting conversation. We can get into the objective stuff a little bit later, but I'd like to talk about the behavior stuff first. Like, what does it mean to set a really solid nutritional foundation? And then we have to define, well, what do we even mean? Because I know you and I are on the same page when we use that term, like a solid fueling foundation. That's like, are you fueling for the activity that you do? Are you fueling for the cognition that you need and you want? Are you fueling for the energy throughout the day that you require? All of those things. And then everything else is secondary to those points. Where does your head go when I say that, the behavior piece and detaching versus not from nutrition?
Yeah, there's no doubt. We could do the same thing for exercise, meaning that movement has to play a role inside of this, because then you're into arguments of, well, what happens if people don't do any movement? And then we're like, well, yeah. So that's got to go into it as well. So I agree with you there on that. But the reason why we do demarcate it, and we're repeating this from last week, is that between your and my conversation and who's mainly listening, which would be practitioners or people who are interested in this idea on a bigger level other than just the daily human principles, is that it's good to demarcate it and to extract them and put them into their own buckets and like dig on them. Because as I've said, I've only said it more recently, let's say past 5 years or so, it takes an entire practice of fitness coaching to realize that all that you learned was not only futile, but it allows you to give the basic truthful principles with more steam. Mm-hmm. There's more behind it. See what I'm saying? So that I'm agreeing with your point on the behavior, it's all really together, but we have to extract it in conversation for that reason as practitioners, because it allows you then to, and just metaphorically, the coach starts and he's just handing out basic lifestyle guidelines for 30 years, but the whole time they're learning about deeply about those 3 areas. Why? Because at the end of their career, they can, walk silently into the night, quietly and peacefully with content, because they understand the basics at a much deeper level. You see that? Yeah. And they were able to push aside all the crap and like push the lies, whatever. And the whole time they were still saying, just do lunges and broccoli and be kind. It was just like the same thing over and over and over, right? At first, and as I said before, when you're starting out, you don't even know why you're saying that. You're believing that those are principles. You're believing in it. And then over time, you're the craftsman, right? It's like, well, doing it my way. I do broccoli rab as opposed to broccoli. It's like my own version. This is Carl's broccoli, Carl's lunges, Carl's will. This is Carl's attitude. And then as a master, it's the same message. But this whole time you read 50 books on the demarcation between behavior, exercise, and nutrition. So I don't know if I shirked there, but yeah, where I bring those words together for behavior and nutrition, I think of words in there like knowledge acquisition, and I also think of awareness and intuition, and I push those into will, and then choice, right? So if you mash all those together, those aren't lunges and they aren't broccoli, right? They're what? In our language, it's in the behavior realm. How will humans think? How are they going to spend their time? What's their stories that they spend their time with every day, all the time, right? And so if we're a coach and we're going to impart that listen, we're going to demarcate these B, E's, and N's, but you do need to know that when we do speak about this, your will to do this, your will to do this, your will to do this, it's largely encompassing all your behavior.
What do you think the most important, like let's, I know I used this example a couple weeks ago, James, but you're in Coeur d'Alene and I don't know, you're chatting with one of your hockey buddies, and he's curious, right? And he really wants to dig deep and understand, what he needs to do, quote unquote, to take better care of himself from a fueling standpoint. And he said, James, tell me the most important thing I need to think about or consider as it relates to my nutritional and fueling practice. Where would you start that conversation with him?
It's so easy for me to say. It would just be, a conversation about what real food is.
Yeah.
That's where it would kind of end up, but I would individualize it. And I'm no sage on that, but I've had lots of experience, right, in conversations with people. I can read people, eyes, their conversation, how they approach me, how they stand, what they talk about. I'm aware of our communication and relationship. I'm aware of who's in the room listening or not listening. Like I'm a coach, right? So I had all those experiences. So I will individualize that, but the overriding concept of it will largely be based upon this possible back and forth, depending on the time we have, on real food, what real food is. Because I know that will then, it kind of moves the conversation away from what they expect me to say, right? Because the public would expect me to say, oh, he's going to have the newest, greatest fix for something, right? He must be up on all the clinical nutritional journals research on protein timing, and on supplementation for old guys that shouldn't be playing hockey. Like he's definitely going to give me the thing on that. So that's where I would move them for two reasons there, because I know I could speak a good individualized word on real food, but also because I know they want me to take it a certain area. So 20 years ago, I would have started at I know this is what you're reading and I know this is what the public is telling you, but I would work them back and it would take way too much time, right? It'd be exhausting. And so for that reason, I kind of landed over time to this simplicity of the real food conversation for those people.
Let's have that one then, if you don't mind, James.
Yeah.
Let's talk about real food. What is real food?
Yeah, if you're someone in the public that's listening, it would be stuff that doesn't really have ingredients, or if there's nothing really on the ingredient chart, let's say, or if there is, it's bagged up or whatnot, then it's the most minimal form of ingredients. If there is ingredients, it's there just to basically allow it to sit there for a couple of days, for a week, or etc. So that would, you're getting into qualifications there of what I'm really talking about for the public. For a coach or someone who's practiced of it, I think I would approach it in the human biological sustenance, nurturing, survival, reproduction realm, which would be the birds in the air and animals in the water and animals on land. Anything you can source from the land that grows, fruit and vegetables, peas, nuts and seeds, grains off the land. Yeah, and then for the coach, I'm starting in that direction, more around these really age-old principles of, you could just go out and just, like a friend of mine and his boys went a couple of weeks ago. We went foraging for mushrooms, right? I'm trying to gain more knowledge on it, and he knows a lot about it. So so it's that kind of thing. I'm just going to grab it, right? And I know what it is, and I'm going to chop it up. I'm going to have it with onions with my steak, so that's right approach for the coach.
Why? Like what's the, like, why should I opt for real food, or why might that be a better decision for me than all the other things that, there's science that's coming out right now that says that the real food actually doesn't serve much more than the thing that we would call fake food, as long as the macronutrients or even in the calories are taken into account.
Yeah, well, in that argument per se, there's never really going to be a consensus on who determines what the ideal outcome is for people. if I'm making sense. So that's why there will be forever argument. And it's somewhat similar to the exercise thing, in which that's why I say you just got to believe, because
Yeah.
I will never, ever be able to prove to you in a scientific box that real food is better than any other choice. I'll never be able to prove that. But the reason why we should, you know, to answer your question, the reason why it should be of the most importance, because you need to say, prior to all of this, prior to the doctor with the white jacket and the computer and his spreadsheet and the lab and the microscope and all that, you take all of that away and realize, guess what? At one time, there wasn't any of that. You take all of that away. How are you moving forward? How are you traveling across land? How are you reproducing and nurturing a child? How are you living later than 30 years of age? How are you sustaining, right? Day to day. Just think about that. Remove all of the flack of the technology and industry and et cetera, right? And if you still don't believe me, then watch Alone or watch Naked and Afraid, or what, like, take away all those things, because there are actual, empirical studies, indirect empirical studies going on today that are actually captured, right? And what do people do when they're out there? Don't have a computer, don't have, it's like, well, got to eat that squirrel. Oh, got to forage for some, fiber from this bark. So that's where I'd go, Carl. But I preempted it by saying I will never, in my lifetime, show you studies. And if you're like, oh, well, if you can't show me studies, you shouldn't be in the conversation. Well, that's a fair point. I accept that point, but it's because there's just way too much that won't allow, for good reason, just a concept that allows people to just like lower the intensity, lower the stress in the room around the choices for food, based upon that like modern society facade that we have over everything, which is just measurement and analysis means something good and right, but it's not.
Yeah, it's like optimization mindset, right?
Yes, and modern times, Carl, we don't have to really do a lot of hard work in modern times. Yeah. So we have all this time on our hands, all this leisure, punching keys. We actually don't have to like go and get our food, which is the whole, I mean, people just kind of wipe over that, right? And just think in their head, listen, get on with it. Yeah, it's not yeah, but it's an evolutionary mismatch. So don't start the conversation with it's modern times and we have these phones and therefore, no. You need to say, what's the basic of this evolutionary mismatch issue? Then we can get into a conversation, right?
No, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. Because that story is, because you mentioned the term empirical, right? Like we do have empirical evidence of what you're saying, right? And it's like, even before the empirical evidence, when someone hears that, unless they're like trying to be a contrarian, or they're just like, well, I just want to like disprove this point. I think anyone listening, when they hear the advice, hey man, like just eat real food. Like, I don't think anyone like truly and honestly hears that and they're like, oh no, that's stupid and that's not going to be good for me. From an empirical standpoint, that story's been told so many times, right? Like, just because you have access to it doesn't mean that it's good for you, right? I just think of yes, good point. But I think of Dopamine Nation, right? And going through that book, and just like, it's so obvious, like going through it, it's almost confirming what you already know to be true. It's like, hey, when drugs are available and they're more potent and they get you right to the feeling that you want to feel, people are going to become addicted to that. When someone has this like natural desire, this natural sexual desire, and you put a device in front of them and they have to click a couple keys and it takes them to anything that they want to see in the world, they might become addicted to that. When you put fake food in front of someone that actually tricks their natural evolutionary, perception to what this food feels like, how it fills you, the hormones that it creates, and all of that. It's like they might become addicted to those things, right? And we can go on and on and on and on and on. And we could even say like, there's some things that could potentially be quote unquote good for you, that can become not good for you, right? It's like someone can actually get addicted to learning. Someone can become addicted to reading, right? Because what is the definition of an addiction, right? The definition of an addiction in its simplest form is the overconsumption or the overdoing of something that is not good for yourself or for those around you, right? So it's like we can turn absolutely anything into an addiction. And of course, we can turn food into an addiction. Going back to your empirical evidence piece, it's like we see empirical evidence that people do not become addicted to chicken breast. Mm-hmm. We see empirical evidence that people aren't so addicted to broccoli that they just can't stop. But we also see empirical evidence that when people reach inside of the bag with the 15 to 85 ingredients, it's like there's some properties inside of that trick our brains to become addicted to it because we really like what it's giving us, but it's not actually satisfying our deepest evolutionary things that are going to tell us like, hey, dude, stop, like you're good, right? So we empirically, we know that, right? So we could go down a bunch of rabbit holes. I'm like, yeah, dude, just eat real food because it makes sense, dude. Like, and it makes sense. So don't trick yourself, right?
Yeah, but that's the point. It's easier to say that than doing it.
Yeah,
just do it because it makes sense. That's pretty easy for us to say, right?
Yeah. Do it because it makes sense, and you have to believe that it makes sense, right? Why do you have to believe it makes sense? Because there's enough empirical evidence if you open your eyes that it absolutely makes sense. You know.
But it's like with exercise, it's tough to pull people away from the dose, right? And the pleasure, because there was a lot of pleasure in high intensity activity, high intense exercise, lots of pleasure in that. And it's the same for food. I agree with you. Call it what you want, but it's all wrapped up now with, the sounds, people, kids on TikTok loving listening to sounds, people like crunching something, or it's
ASMR.
It's all pleasure dome. It's a pleasure dome, right?
Yeah.
Which is a whole other conversation on, what happens when pleasures just can't be fixed. When the pleasure is just like this too, and you got to find it here and you got to do it here. And then over time, it's like, oh, wait, now the pleasure doesn't work anymore. And so now you got to find other forms of pleasure, like something that's further than that, That's an interesting one.
Yeah. Pleasure and pain. And I know you know this, but pleasure and pain occurs in the exact same place in our brain, exact same place. So we always need to balance those things, right? Like we need to intentionally, and pain's a big word, right? Like, I'm not saying people like hurt yourself, right? But we need to intentionally do things that balance those two things out. That's where the whole concept of like earn your dopamine came from, right? Where it's like, that's a balancing of pleasure and pain. But yeah, man, one thing before we move on from the real food piece, because you mentioned it in exercise earlier, we have to also pay attention to what end, right? So it's like if you're having a conversation with if you're having a conversation with this hockey guy I have made up in Coeur d'Alene, I'm pretty
sure. It's not
sure.
made up. It's real.
Oh, okay. This is actually happening. Yeah. So in that conversation, he's probably going to say, because I want to do this, right? And when someone says, because I want to be as lean as I can possibly be, full stop, right? Now the conversation, it gets a little bit weird, right? Because now it's like, well, where does the real food conversation fit in there? Because the true reality is that eating real food isn't going to get someone as lean as humanly possible the fastest possible way. That's not the fastest possible route. So now there's like the like, well, do I jockey for position to like try to change this person's mind? Or am I just saying, hey, it's a really good practice to eat real food? So that's something that is real, and that's a reality. And something that, we can't hide from, right? Because to what end is always the other part of that conversation. Okay, truth number one, eat real food. Yeah, I'm good with that.
Of course, over time, we may want to fix that up to have yeah, you may want to create like sub levels of conversation underneath it, just like we do with challenge your body. Like it's super simple, you know.
When should we eat real food? Truth number two. Like what does rhythm and timing matter?
Daylight hours. And this is to the public, that's the answer. To the timing of when to the coach, um, it's at a time where your body will be able to um, digest and break down those foodstuffs. And then, tied into that is the hunger and satiety conversation. And to the public, if we're past the point that we're going to be in waking hours is when you're going to consume your food. Because I'm not even talking about the timing of that relative to sleep and all that. It's like, no, because we're just putting it in like a single demarcated bucket to discuss that. Then the hunger and satiety is next in that. And that's a simple principle of, what our moms or dads or maybe grandparents now used to tell us is just eat when you're hungry. And, I don't know what their saying used to be around food hygiene practices because it was just implicated in day-to-day practices for this to happen. But you would sit down to eat. You were probably having conversation with someone else. You were relaxed when you did it. And you pretty much kind of knew through intuition. There was no pressures for, the total amount you had to have, or, if it was still under that banner of real food, you're just like, yeah, that, I'm satisfied, and there was no massive conversation on this. There was no measurement in detail, and in those times there was most likely no food wasting. So you probably were just under the total amount in regards to what may be seen today on a plate based upon that. But the food hygiene practices around hunger and satiety could be said slightly differently to the coach or to the human. And I would say that's secondary after the daylight hours as the timing of when you could eat. And then if this is where it's great as a coach because you have to use those as principles and then you have to fit it into the person's lifestyle. Right? You still have to make them believe in the principles, and every day you're espousing them and talking about it. But then you have someone who, as you know, Carl, with their lifestyle, it's very difficult even to apply those like really well. So you have to, do your best, honestly. But what I can tell you what you don't do is you don't apply a sports medicine paradigm answer to that client. Yeah, that's not what you do. You have to find inroads to things like, well, do you have 15 minutes in your day to go find a corner in the basement of the hospital where you can just sit down and relax and chew on some meat? Like, do you have that 15 minutes? Yes. Well, that's where we're going to start. So it's daylight hours. You're probably not outside, but it's daylight hours, and you're on the inroads to the hunger satiety and food hygiene practices around that. I think there's probably more, but it's a good question. I haven't really thought too much more outside of that with regards to timing. And then, to the person, I just want to impart this portion, but a truth that I would offer to the hockey player, and remember, I know the situation, but it's a generalized concept, is 3 meals per day, 3 square meals. And there's also reasons why I impart that, because I understand it's going to be possibly sitting down, possibly during the day. So now all those principles are inside of that simple idea. And sometimes that's all it takes for someone. As I said, what your grandma used to say, right? It's like, there's a reason why there's breakfast, lunch, and dinner. If you're in Canada or south of Canada, it's different. I forget in the wording, supper, I guess. Breakfast, lunch, supper. That's not like a sociological Marxist experiment conspiracy. It's like, no, just over time, people are like, well, we wake up, I'm hungry. okay, I'll do whatever I'm doing. And then middle of the day, it's like, geez, I'm kind of hungry again. Eat some food. At the end of the day, let's just sit down and it's like, okay, well, it just kind of works out that way. And I'd
Yeah.
say those three, because then that would start the conversation, Carl, for someone to be like, well, I heard about this 2 meals a day. Well, it's like, okay, well, let's talk about the first two things, right? Not under the paradigm of sports medicine. And then let's approach it that way, right? Will you be too hungry at times? Do you have the food hygiene practices to do it twice a day? And then we can get into that, the daylight hours. Yeah, that's a good conversation.
Eat when you're hungry. I don't think that works anymore for most people.
No.
I think people need to be rehabbed out of when their hunger signals.
Yeah, but this brings in that point I mentioned last week, right? Is the whole I said it for performative cases, but people need to think about that. This is where if you're just dealing with nutrition in a bucket, it's very difficult. But as coaches, we should do this. We should say, whenever we're going to make those statements, recognize that, yes, people will also be doing movement. So to your point, yeah, the hunger thing is a difficulty today. Do you know why hunger is a difficulty thing today for concept? Because people are doing useless, intense activity.
Mm-hmm.
So you see, if you take that out of it, this is where you and I and a bunch of different people, we experiment with all different kinds of things. And this is what different forms of fasting, when we were injured, or also just experimenting with different forms of what the public would know, what the coaches would know as like polar style of training, which is just like good intense weightlifting, or should say absolute strength training, bodybuilding, right? Not exhaustive shit, but like strong shit here, and then easy aerobic work. When you started doing that, we're like, gosh, I don't require as much sugar. It's like, this is fascinating, right? Or when you did a fast, or when you were injured, right? Because those times are eye-opening moments for us to go, wow, I'm not as hungry. So don't forget about that in the whole hunger equation, is that it's easy for us to talk about it in this nutrition bucket, but movement has a lot to do with it. And to your point previously, behaviors, right? So anxiety, pleasure, like all these things have a part to play with our perception around hunger as well.
Yeah, and we can't forget about, so whenever we're thinking, so we're going to talk about, or we are talking about timing and rhythm right now, which I think are two different things, which I'll hit on in a second. But when we're thinking about those things, we have to think about how the human body works in synergy in different systems, right? So we have nutrition, which we're talking about, but to your point, we can't forget movement and how movement influences our nutrition and what we require, and when we require it, or when our body thinks we require it. And then also we have to think about sleep, right? So when we think about rhythm and timing, we have to think about synergizing our sleep, our food, and our movement all together. So we can't, whenever one of those things goes away, the other two are going to be impacted, right? But on the rhythm and timing piece, I think that those are two different things. I think rhythm is more like, hey, do you have great consistency? Timing is when are you doing the things in which you're consistent in, right? So I think you take an individual approach and like talking to someone about those things and what they attack first, because to your point, the person that it sounded like you were talking about like a doctor or nurse that works in a hospital at late hours or whatever the case is, and they're not seeing the sun when they're eating. You're gonna have to talk about rhythm with that person. Timing is just going to be less than optimal, and it's just like, what would our advice be to them? Get out of that less than optimal environment whenever you can, as soon as you can.
You've done, and we've talked to people about. We have a person who was close to us who went through that. Mm-hmm. What did I tell her like weeks after I first met her? Get out of your job. Your job's going to kill you. Mm-hmm. Right. So and I mean, I don't mean to be frank on saying that it's like, oh, well, it's tough for people in night shift, because you could spend years, as I said, studying that whole thing, or you could work with that person to tie them into these truths around what it means for vitality. Right. Mm-hmm. So then otherwise you're just working around things, trying to fix stuff and band-aid stuff. right? Fake lights at 3 a.m., while you're chewing on your organic beef. It's like, well, that's,
Yeah, we're on the timing piece, man. It's just like what I want everyone to understand. It's like we started talking about this last week, rhythm, circadian rhythm specifically. We can't, no matter how unsexy this conversation might be, we have to always honor it. It's like our systems are set up to digest food at certain times. And you said it very simply, right? Like eat when the sun is up. Like there's a lot behind you just saying that someone can spend their entire lives studying and trying to really understand. So I do want to respect that, but it is as simple as that, right? Like there are times that our body is equipped and optimally set up to digest foods. And you know what? There's also times where we don't want our body digesting foods because why? Remember we talked about sleep and movement and nutrition. It's like, when do we not want our body working to digest foods? When we're trying to get great sleep. And if we eat when we're if we eat and it affects that great sleep, it's almost like it's like a perpetual like fox eating at its own tail, right? Where it's like my sleep sucks because my sleep sucks. My satiety is offset. I'm not digesting properly. I eat bad foods. I do this. And it's just like, bro, just stop and like create some rhythm and respect timing, right? So I think the best nutritional prescription to anyone is find rhythm and time in which you eat food without even talking about what they're eating and all of that. Because to your point, if you're like, hey, I want you to eat 3 times a day and I want you to stop eating at like, what time do you go to sleep? 9? Okay. I want you to stop eating at like 5:30 or 6. And then I want you to find 2 other opportunities to start eating, or to eat those other 2 meals. And some things are just going to work itself out. Like most people aren't sitting down at noon and crushing Haagen-Dazs and highly processed foods, right? Especially if they know that that's one of their 3 meals that they're going to eat that day. So timing, I think, is super important. But also we have to understand the digestive process. Like, what is that? What happens? Like, is it a big deal if I'm like running around while I'm eating, right? It's like, if we truly understand, like, hey, there's this like process that happens prior to us eating, and we salivate and our body starts to create some gastric juice to get ready to digest some foods. And then when we put those foods in our mouth, we chew foods, and there's like some mechanical work that's being done, and digestive enzymes are being spit out. And then we swallow and it goes down our esophagus, and there's like waves of muscle contractions that are like pushing that food down into the stomach. And then it's not even done, right? It's like 2 to 4 to 5 to 6 hours. And that food is like digesting in the stomach. And then it makes its way to our small intestine. And then there's some stuff that happens in the small intestine. Then it goes to the large intestine, and then we poop it out, right? So it's like, if we understand that and we can like respect that process, and that entire process takes energy for our body, and our body needs to have that energy, and we need to create some rhythm around that energy. Maybe we start to think like, well, maybe I don't do this type of exercise because it might mess with that digestive process. Or maybe I don't do this exercise at this time because it's going to affect that digestive process. And maybe I need to understand what needs to happen with my gut and my digestive system when I'm sleeping. I want none of those things happening while I'm sleeping, right? Because there's some things that are occurring to get me ready to do the same thing tomorrow. And now if my rhythm is messed up and my system doesn't know when it's going to get its next bite or anything like that, and that's not like being psycho with like, I need to, take the bite at 6:18 a.m. It's just like, no, you just need to create some rhythm so your body knows when to get ready to go through that digestive process. Very simply put, it's like, honor rhythm and timing, understand the digestive process, and also respect the other 2 things that come along and can affect that digestive process, which is your movement practices and your sleep. Right. And I think if everyone was like, okay, I'm going to follow those rules, dude, holy man, like you wouldn't even have to get into are you eating 110 grams of protein? What kind of carbohydrates are you eating? It's just like, no, just do that. And you're just going to be astounded how things just kind of like fall into place.
Yeah, it makes me think about the parallels again with how people have this, I believe, this innate thing to want to physically express themselves, right? And I never really knew anyone that, did a pure version of physical expression daily over time that said, oh, I can't get to sleep, you know? So it's so easy for people, who you approach, layman off the street who comes to us like, oh, I have sleep problems. Like, well, what are you doing during the day that's challenging for you? Oh, nothing. Well, maybe you don't need any sleep. You're not doing anything. So that's a humorous way to say it's all tied in, right? It's all tied in. So maybe you spend the last 3 hours of your day every day with someone you hate. So think about that in the context of like, well, that's probably going to be very stressful for you. Yeah. Well, that must be hard for you, right? Well, let's talk about strategies that I can help with as not a psychologist, but just a coach and a friend that can kind of help you work around this stuff because it's impacting your sleep. That's just a storyline to think that it's not just expansion of energy or poor foods at 6 p.m. Maybe it's like some real bad stuff on behaviors that's going on in your mind and in your soul, really. That's affecting you prior to your sleeping. It's all very parallel, which is it kind of makes me feel good because it ties in all those things. But as a coach, it is good for you and I, but also most people listening in to think about that for yourself, right? For yourself as a coach, as a human, you have to like really get okay with this. It can't just be words that Carl will use on rhythm and timing. It's got to sit inside of you as like, I get it. Bill, the coach, get that. I really get that, right? Why? Because I experienced it myself, and I did what he was talking about. 3 days in a row, I didn't really do much activity, and I kind of reflected back. It's like my sleeps weren't that great, Then you had a bunch of days in a row, good physical activity, and all other things being equal, good sleep. And so you were like, Another thing that I think about on that, which I don't want us to take a different direction, but is think about. This is where I was talking about the innate thing for physical expression. Just imagine if your conversation there around like chewing food and mucus and digestive aids and all that kind of digestive enzymes, all these kind of things. Imagine if kids were taught that. Just imagine that, and it's like what I have discussed at length with my fitness and youth podcast with Danny, that we have all the answers to take away that entire youth sports medicine paradigm. And the answers are, you just give this young person this intuition and awareness and knowledge at a young age. And then they're kind of laughing from there forward when they get preyed upon at 25 to do high intense activity and supplementation. They're like, how stupid is that? Why would you ever want to do that to yourself? Right? It makes me crap my pants. I can't sleep, doesn't abide by all those things I learned when I was 7 to 10 years of age about the basics of like sitting down and real food and doing field work. We foraged for mushrooms and found avocados and, killed a squirrel. It's like that whole thing just washes away. So I can't help but discuss that for how simplicity you put it, which is knowledge that a coach should be thinking about as to how they can explain it to the broken adult. But you have to think about, how can we do this to our families? How can we have these conversations around the table to our kids? How can we, like, I chat with the kids next door about this. I don't have little ones around anymore. So I impart all my like little stuff on real food and exercise and behaviors to these, 10, 8, 6, 4, 2, 1 across the street on that.
I can't tell you how many times we've gone down like digestive rabbit holes and like, hey, Carson, I need you to chew your food, dude. Okay. But this is why I need you to chew your food, right?
Yeah.
That's such a good point, man.
It's a great conversation too. I mean, because you're imparting knowledge that will honestly, it's gonna allow. It's just like an open. I don't even know how to describe it. It's such a great open runway to maximal potential for someone. It's just such a great open runway, right? This, just rips all the stuff off. They sit really solid in their beliefs of what's good for them. They're super intuitive. That's what I really have found it builds. It builds this really great intuition and awareness, which is so important for a young kid as they get into, the real world.
I don't know if there's a third that I really even want to dig into outside of eat real food and do it with rhythm and timing. Like, I think We could go down so many, right? But so many of the rabbit holes that we go down into is actually going to be downstream of those two.
Well, I think what's not what's not there in the chart, number one is awareness and intuition, but it's not written in the code, if that makes sense. You know, just
Yep.
under the heading of nutrition, right? So the that's kind of in belief that it's all there in those practices of the eating of real food and the rhythm and timing.
Yeah, yeah, a good point. And you mentioned this already, but it bears, or it's worth repeating, is understanding the connection is so dang powerful, man. Like understanding how all of these things are just, they just, our goal and intention should be to synchronize, right? Like, and we shouldn't do it, in a way that we're like, we have to read every, journal and article under the sun to like figure out like, how do I optimize to synchronize? But it's just like, I want to synchronize my life. I want to synchronize the practices around behavior and exercise and nutrition, and all of those things, because they have to be, right? Because that's the rabbit hole you go down when you start thinking about any one of them. And you hit it very nicely just now with like the person that has issues sleeping. It's like, I bet very few coaches are saying, hey, you're having issues sleeping. What their brains probably go to is like, are you creating a solid sleep environment? Do you have a routine? It's like,
Just
what
rehab. That's rehab.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
It's like, what are you doing to need sleep? That's an interesting question, right?
Yeah.
What are you doing to require sleep?
Yeah. Because even in our language, Carl, we say try to get sleep. Like it's like we're chasing it. But sleep is just it's a natural process. And you won't lie down if you're not doing anything. Do you know what I mean? Like it's, or if you will, but you're like, looking at the ceiling, trying to figure things out. But I never met anyone that was in that case. And I said in the purest physical expression, I met lots of athletes and lots of people who are broken lifestyle wise, or on lots of medicines, or having a real rough time go with stuff for sure. But in the pure, those individuals don't talk about that. They're not chasing it.
And I need to improve my language around sleep, because my head usually goes to like,
Oh,
are
me
you
too.
getting enough? Are you getting enough? Right.
No, me too.
I should even reframe that to be like, are you getting the sleep that you require?
Well, see, this is beautiful, because that's the practice of higher order thinking, is really you make it such that it's not even language, if that makes sense. So, and this sit well with you, because then stuff just makes sense. We're not having a conversation on it. We're not trying to get it. It just happens. Now, if we want to backroom philosophize over it, that's fantastic, right? Why does it just happen? Well, it just happens because we expend this energy and we balance our blood sugar. And that's great conversation, but how is that helpful to the person, right? It's not helpful. To the person, I want it being recognized as, if you're horizontal, it's a natural practice that allows each day to be maximized. Period. Right? Period. Because if you start chasing it and timing it and measuring it, sure, there's things you could pick out of it and individualize it. But again, I think we've lost then what you've just brought up is this, like, we're just putting it into a language that works better for us, but maybe it shouldn't be in the conversation at all. That's why, in my opinion, again, I'll say it, sleep is not on my 3 things in my house, right? But what is first? It's challenge the body. Right. So that's my bias, right? I understand that we're in a modern world. We have to do that. Right. So, and I think if that happens, and I'll say it again, all things fall into place. All things fall into place after that. An argument possibly for another time, but that's the reason for it.
What I've said for a few years now is exercise and movement is the great assessor, right? It'll tell us what's off in our basic lifestyle guidelines. And again, because I think very similar to you, that is my bias, right? It's like when I do something that's really, like, I can go down in the garage right now and do something really challenging, or just challenging for the day, and I'll know intuitively, is everything else good, right? Was my
Mhm.
sleep good? Am I eating fine? Am I getting enough sun? Am I, thinking about things, or is my brain clouded, right? Like for me, I think that we can assess a lot of things through just challenging physical activity. And we can come to a lot of answers without even talking about all of those
Yeah,
other things, or
agreed.
specifically assessing those things. You could just say, hey, can you do this thing and recover from it? And if no, let's see what's going on. Exercise is the
The
greatest
small
assessor.
T truth, basically. The the iron never lies. Remember that one from
Oh yeah.
Rollins?
Yeah.
Such a powerful statement. So
Yeah.
simple, but so beautiful. Thanks, man. That was great conversation. A bunch of stuff written down that it just felt good writing down that I never really have
Yeah.
to talk about because we discussed all of it inside of there.
Cool.
Intentions and intuition, and yeah, that was it also scaffolds the area that I will be spending a little more time on the what you propose, this like where does the B, E, and N and priorities
Yeah.
and the B area. So I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
All right, brother. All right. Drive safe, and
Thanks, man.
let me know if you need anything.
Okay, take care.
All right. See you, buddy.